Black CEO mistaken for waiter at elite gala. Hours later, he bought the entire hotel. Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get back to the story. The chandelier light hit his tux like morning sunlight on steel. He stood quiet, tall, holding a glass of Merlot that hadn't yet touched his lips. Around him, silk gowns, tailored suits, money disguised as manners. Then came the voice that sliced through the orchestra. "Serve, don't stand." The woman's tone was sharp, trained the kind that had always been obeyed. Guests turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the violinist froze. She pointed straight at him, red nails gleaming under the chandeliers. He didn't move, didn't blink, just looked at her measured like a man studying a storm before deciding if it was worth walking through. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You're blocking the view," she snapped. "If you're staff, then serve. Don't just stand there." A ripple of awkward laughter fluttered through the tables. One man whispered, "Is he part of the catering team?" Another chuckled, "Guess they're hiring models now." He straightened his cuffs slowly, deliberate, precise, a gesture so calm it felt like defiance. Then finally he spoke. "I never serve," he said, his voice low but cutting through the marble courtyard. "I lead." The air seemed to crack. The woman's face stiffened, but she didn't yet understand what had shifted. No one did. Not yet. His name was Malcolm Reed, though no one there knew it. But the tension had already taken a seat at every table. Malcolm sipped his wine, eyes steady on the woman who'd mistaken him for a waiter. The night wasn't over. It was just beginning. Malcolm didn't come to the gala to be seen. He came to observe, to watch how people acted when they thought power had a dress code. From the balcony above, the city glittered like money pretending to be light. Inside, waiters floated through the room with trays of champagne while guests compared donations like trophies. This wasn't just any event, it was the annual Evermont Charity Ball hosted inside the Grand Eden Hotel, a property Malcolm's company had been quietly negotiating to acquire for 6 months. Tonight was supposed to be a test run, a private look at the culture he was about to own. He'd chosen to blend in, no entourage, no designer label, flashing just presence. But presence, it turned out, was enough to threaten people who measured worth by appearance. At the center table, Charlotte Pierce, the woman who'd barked the insult, was laughing again. The kind of laugh people use to erase their mistakes. Her husband leaned over, whispering something about the help getting bold. A cluster of executives nodded. The orchestra played on. Malcolm set his glass down and walked toward the terrace doors. A hotel manager, thin tie, anxious smile, intercepted him. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said in a practiced tone that meant, "I don't want trouble, just silence." "No misunderstanding," Malcolm replied. "Only a reminder." The manager blinked. A reminder that manners cost nothing, but they reveal everything. The words landed heavy. The man stepped aside. Malcolm walked out onto the terrace, where the night air felt cleaner, less judgment, more truth. Below, through the glass, he could see the ballroom still spinning, Charlotte still performing grace. He remembered being 24, standing outside another hotel, denied entry, because someone thought his suit was too casual for the clientele. That night, he wrote his first business plan on a napkin and swore he'd own places like that one day. Now, here he was, inside, one of them still being mistaken for the help. From the terrace, a soft voice interrupted his memory. "Mr. Reed," it was Ava Nguyen, a junior event coordinator he'd met briefly at a previous conference. Vietnamese-American sharp eyes, hands clasped nervously around a tablet. I recognized you," she whispered. "They shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Malcolm gave a faint smile. "You don't need to apologize for them." "I'm not," she said. "I'm apologizing for myself for not speaking up." He studied her for a moment. "Then speak up now. Tomorrow things will look very different here." Ava frowned, unsure what he meant. But Malcolm was already turning back toward the ballroom where power dressed itself in arrogance. He fixed his cufflinks again, checked his watch, and said quietly, almost to himself, "A few hours more. Then we close the acquisition." Inside, the music swelled. Outside, Justice was quietly checking in. When Malcolm stepped back inside, the room had already rewritten the story. In whispers, of course. The way privilege always edits its own mistakes. Charlotte Pierce now laughed louder than before, as if volume could erase guilt. A few guests glanced his way and looked quickly back down at their plates. Pretend nothing happened that was their favorite sport. He made his way toward the bar. The bartender, a young man with sleeves rolled to the elbow, froze when he saw him. Sir, can I offer you something? Malcolm smiled slightly. Just water. The bartender nodded, grateful, like he'd just been handed away out of someone else's tension. Across the room, Charlotte's voice rose again. Honestly, I think it's unprofessional to let staff mingle with guests. It sets the wrong image. Malcolm heard every word. So did the hotel's general manager, Richard Caldwell, who had just entered, the kind of man who saw conflict as bad PR, not moral failure. He hurried to her table. Charlotte, let's not make this bigger than it is, he whispered, glancing nervously toward Malcolm. She scoffed. Then tell your staff to know their place. Richard straightened, forced a diplomatic smile, and approached Malcolm. Sir, I'd like to clarify. Malcolm turned calm. Clarify what Richard hesitated. Your role here tonight. My role, Malcolm asked, still soft. You mean as the man who funded half this event? The manager blinked. For a second, his mask slipped. What Malcolm didn't answer. He simply pulled a folded invitation from his pocket, embossed, personalized with the sponsor seal at the bottom. The name Reed Foundation gleamed under the chandelier. A few guests nearby noticed. Someone whispered, wait, he's a sponsor. Charlotte's fork clattered against her plate. Malcolm tucked the invitation back into his jacket. You see, he said evenly, I wasn't standing in your way. I was standing in a space I paid to build. The words cut cleaner than any insult. Richard stammered. Mr. Reed, I had no idea. That's the problem, Malcolm said quietly. No one ever does. Until it's too late. Silence. You could almost hear the ice melt in the glasses. Then from the far corner, Ava Nguyen appeared again, holding her tablet. Her voice trembled, but she spoke clearly enough for everyone near the bar to hear. Mr. Caldwell, the corporate board is requesting your presence. Something about a transfer of ownership on the Grand Eden file. Richard's eyes darted. What transfer? Malcolm took his glass of water, glanced once toward Charlotte, and said, you'll find out in exactly 45 minutes. He walked away, leaving behind a ballroom full of uneasy smiles and whispered guesses. Some nights end in applause. Others begin with an awakening. Tonight would be both. The orchestra shifted into a slow jazz number, the kind meant to drown out tension, but the air refused to soften. Conversations had thinned into murmurs. Glasses clinked more cautiously. And yet in the middle of it all, Malcolm Reed moved like still water, calm, composed, unbothered. He returned to the table near the window where a small card read reserved for sponsors. It had been empty all night. Now he filled it, and suddenly the entire table looked occupied by authority itself. Charlotte Pierce kept glancing over her shoulder, her smile stretched tight. Her husband whispered, just ignore him, but her hands betrayed her nerves, fingers tapping against crystal like a countdown she couldn't control. Malcolm's phone buzzed once against the linen cloth. A short message from his assistant board connected. Phase 1 complete. Legal waiting on your signal. He didn't type a reply. Just turned the phone face down and took a slow sip of water. Across the ballroom, Ava Nguyen stood by the catering station, her tablet still glowing. She watched Charlotte pace near the stage, whispering furiously to the event staff, trying to reclaim control of the night. He's not who he says he is, Charlotte muttered. He's bluffing. Ava took a quiet breath. The moment of choice had arrived, the line between witnessing and acting. She looked toward Malcolm, who seemed to sense her gaze. He didn't nod. He didn't signal. But his stillness said everything. Truth doesn't need noise. At that same moment, Richard Caldwell returned from a quick phone call to headquarters. His face was pale. He approached Charlotte and spoke under his breath, but it carried through the mic left on the podium. Charlotte, stop talking. The acquisition paperwork is real. Reed Holdings just finalized the purchase. The words rippled through the crowd like an invisible tremor. Forks stopped mid-air. The orchestra faltered for half a note before finding its rhythm again. Charlotte froze. That can't be. They wouldn't. They did, Richard said, voice low but breaking. The hotel isn't owned by Evermont anymore. It's his. All color drained from her face. That's impossible. He was just standing there like a... She couldn't even finish the sentence. Malcolm finally looked up. Calm, patient, watching her unravel like an empire of assumptions. He rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. Mrs. Pierce, he said, every word deliberate, I believe you were about to make another announcement tonight. Something about partnerships, Charlotte stammered. Yes, the annual. Then allow me to help, he interrupted softly. You can announce the new ownership as well. A hush spread so deep it seemed to erase sound itself. Malcolm turned slightly toward the stage, his eyes steady but kind, as if giving her a final chance to keep her dignity. "Go ahead," he said. "Tell them who really owns this place." Charlotte swallowed hard, gripping the mic. For the first time that evening, she had no voice left to use. And somewhere near the bar, Ava whispered under her breath, "Justice just checked in." Charlotte stood frozen, the mic trembling between her fingers. The sound system hummed softly the way a room does when pride is being dismantled in real time. Her smile, polished, rehearsed, had vanished, leaving something raw and brittle underneath. Malcolm didn't rush her. He simply waited. Stillness in his hands was strategy. The guests exchanged glances, the kind of quiet panic only wealthy people feel when they realize the social order just shifted and they weren't notified. Richard Caldwell tugged nervously at his collar. "Mrs. Pierce," he murmured, "you should say something. Anything." She turned to him, voice cracking. "This is absurd. He's bluffing." Malcolm finally spoke calm as marble. "Would you like proof?" He motioned slightly toward Ava Nguyen, who stepped forward, clutching her tablet like a key to the truth. The screens around the ballroom flickered the charity slideshow, dissolving into a corporate document header: Reed Holdings Acquisition. Summary: Grand Eden Hotel. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Names, dates, signatures, all there, projected in clean, undeniable font. Charlotte's jaw dropped. I didn't just," Malcolm interrupted gently. "I finalized this deal at 7:02 p.m., 20 minutes before your event began, while you were practicing your speech about equality and business leadership." A few guests looked away, guilt written across sequined faces. Malcolm stepped closer to the stage, his tone still steady. "You said I should serve. I took that to heart. Tonight I'm serving notice." Charlotte lowered the mic slowly. Her husband rose, whispering, "We can fix this," but even he sounded unconvinced. The crowd parted as Malcolm walked forward, not with anger but authority so composed it felt like gravity. He didn't tower. He centered the room. He reached the edge of the stage, eyes never leaving hers. "Mrs. Pierce, when you looked at me, what did you see?" She blinked rapidly, trapped between pride and fear. I thought you were staff." He nodded once. "And that's why you'll never understand leadership. Because real leaders don't need recognition to have power, they create it." The audience exhaled as if the room itself had been waiting for that line. Phones lifted discreetly. Someone whispered, "This is history." Charlotte tried one last act of defiance. "You set me up." "No," Malcolm said quietly. "I gave you a mirror." The room stilled again. Even the orchestra stopped this time. He turned to Richard. "Mr. Caldwell, please. Escort Mrs. Pierce and her team to the manager's office. Their contracts are under review as of now." Charlotte's voice broke. "You can't fire me from a gala." "You're right," Malcolm said. "But I can fire you from my hotel." A murmur spread through the crowd, disbelief, awe, vindication. Cameras were already rolling. But Malcolm didn't care for views. He looked at Ava, nodded slightly, and she dimmed the lights. The charity banner faded. The new one appeared, "Welcome to the Reed Grand." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of reckoning of balance of truth finally standing upright. For a few suspended seconds, the ballroom didn't breathe. The chandeliers glittered over stunned faces, frozen champagne glasses, and silence thick enough to echo. Then, like a tremor, murmurs began to ripple through the tables, shocked disbelief, a few quiet claps that grew into scattered applause. Malcolm didn't bask in it. He simply stepped back from the stage, letting the weight of the moment settle on its own. His calm wasn't arrogance. It was control earned from years of being underestimated. Charlotte Pierce stood rigid beside the mic, her pulse visible at her throat. "You ambushed me," she hissed under her breath. Malcolm's reply was effortless. "No, I invited you to witness accountability." Ava Nguyen approached carefully, her tablet still lit. The hotel's logo had already updated in real time. The Reed Grand shining in minimalist gold. She whispered, "Everything's transferred, sir. Even the staff database." Malcolm nodded. "Good. Keep the essential team. Release the ones who treat respect like it's optional." Charlotte's husband, pale and sweating, turned toward him. This can't be legal." "It's not just legal," Malcolm said, turning to face him. "It's documented, notarized, and funded by every insult that told me I didn't belong here." A few guests gasped quietly. One woman near the bar whispered, "He's quoting himself like he's been waiting for this night his whole life." In truth, he had, just not for revenge, for closure. From the back of the room, Richard Caldwell returned, his tie-loosened expression humbled. "Mr. Reed," he said carefully, "corporate just confirmed it. The property transfer is official. You're well, our new owner. Malcolm gave a single nod. Then start acting like it's new. Richard swallowed hard. Of course. He turned to Charlotte, who still clutched the mic stand like it was an anchor. Mrs. Pierce, he said softly, I think it's best you step down. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She stared at Malcolm as if seeing him for the first time, not the tux, not the skin tone, but the power that didn't need to announce itself. Ava moved closer. Do you want me to escort her out, sir? Malcolm shook his head. No. Let her walk out on her own. Pride is punishment enough. Charlotte blinked, tears threatening to breach the surface she'd spent years perfecting. Without another word, she set the mic down and stepped off the stage. Cameras followed, capturing her silent exit, a reverse coronation. Then something unexpected happened. Guests began to stand, not for her, but for him. One by one they clapped, not loud, not frenzied, but deliberate, like acknowledging a truth too long ignored. Malcolm didn't bow, didn't smile. He simply said, sit. We're not finished. The applause faded. The orchestra, uncertain, waited for a cue that never came. He looked around the room, every face that had once judged him now, reflecting something else entirely. Respect. Regret. Awakening. This isn't about humiliation, Malcolm said quietly. It's about correction. The night was no longer a gala. It was a reckoning wearing black tie. The applause dissolved into a stunned hush. Guests sank back into their chairs, their designer confidence dimming beneath the chandeliers. The orchestra held their instruments mid-air, unsure if the night had become a performance or a confession. Malcolm remained near the stage, one hand in his pocket, the other still holding that untouched glass of water. Calm, steady. Every gesture spoke louder than any threat could. Mr. Reed, Richard began carefully. What would you like us to do next? Malcolm glanced toward him. Begin with honesty. Richard hesitated. About what happened tonight. About what's been happening for years, Malcolm replied. How people like Charlotte could speak the way she did and never expect consequence. How silence became policy. The words cut through the room, sharp but measured. Several guests lowered their eyes. A few others shifted uncomfortably as if their reflection had just spoken back. Ava Nguyen, standing nearby, opened a new file on her tablet. Mr. Reed, we've logged statements, timestamps, everything recorded during the event. Security footage, too. He nodded. Good. That'll go straight to HR and public relations. But keep the names of the staff who stayed quiet out of fear, not agreement. They'll be retrained, not removed. Ava blinked, surprised. You're not firing them. Malcolm gave a faint smile. I don't build by burning, I rebuild by teaching. From the corner of the ballroom, an older guest spoke up, a woman with silver hair and a voice trembling but resolute. Mr. Reed, she said, I was here last year. I saw how they treated the young black pianist during rehearsal. I should have spoken then. Malcolm turned toward her, expression gentle. You're speaking now. That's how change begins. The crowd shifted again, the weight of unspoken truths pressing harder. Charlotte's absence had left a vacuum, and in it, conscience began to fill the space. Another man rose, voice tight. You're making us all look guilty. Malcolm's gaze steadied on him. If the reflection fits, sir, it's because you helped polish the mirror. No one laughed this time. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was reflective, uncomfortable cleansing. Richard exhaled quietly as though surrendering something invisible. Mr. Reed, if I may, what happens to the hotel? Now Malcolm looked around the room, eyes catching the gold lettering on the new banner, the Reed Grand. It becomes what it should have been, he said. A place where luxury isn't an excuse to look down on anyone. Ava's tablet chimed softly, another notification. She leaned in. Sir, the press has already picked up the story. Someone live-streamed the reveal. Malcolm smiled faintly. Good. Let them see that power doesn't have a color, it has conduct. He took one slow sip of his water, then set it down with precision. Tonight isn't about exposure, he said quietly. It's about evolution. The orchestra finally began to play again, not on cue, but in reverence. The melody was slower now, softer, like the sound of a storm, finally learning how to rain. The melody rippled through the ballroom like fragile light on glass, gentle, uncertain, almost cleansing. But beneath the music, the power structure was still trembling. Not everyone was ready to surrender. At the far end of the room, a small cluster of board members from the hotel's previous ownership gathered near the bar. Whispered strategy disguised as small talk. Charlotte Pierce might have left the stage, but her allies hadn't. He can't just walk in and rewrite everything, one man muttered. He bought a building, not a legacy. Another smirked. We'll see how long he lasts when the investors start asking questions. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Malcolm caught the tone before the words. He turned slightly, eyes narrowing with the calm precision of someone who'd heard this 100 times before, men defending systems that no longer serve justice. He gestured subtly toward Ava, who was standing by the tech console. "Can you pull the internal feed?" he asked. She hesitated. "You mean the ballroom mic system?" "Yes. Play it through the side speakers. Just for a moment." Ava tapped a few buttons. The whispers from the bar caught on the ceiling mics suddenly filled the edges of the room, distorted but clear enough. "Bought a building, not a legacy." Gasps flickered through the crowd. The men froze, faces blanching as their private defiance echoed across the marble. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "A legacy isn't inherited," he said, evenly looking their way. "It's earned. And right now, gentlemen, you're earning yourselves an exit interview." One of them stammered. "You can't, I can," Malcolm interrupted softly, "and I already have." He nodded to Ava. She tapped again. Their company access cards deactivated live, displayed on the big screen as each name blinked red, revoked. The crowd went silent. Even the orchestra stopped mid-note. Malcolm stepped closer, not with menace, but precision. "You called it a legacy," he said. "But what you built was exclusion wrapped in etiquette. You mistook tradition for superiority, and that era ends tonight." A single clap broke the quiet, then another. Soon the applause spread, not chaotic but heavy with agreement, the sound of a room finally aligning with truth. Ava lowered her tablet. "Sir," she whispered, "that was bold." Malcolm gave a half-smile. "Correction isn't bold," he said. "It's overdue." From the side, Richard approached again, almost reverent now. "Mr. Reed," he said, "the hotel staff are watching this live from the employee lounge. They're asking, what happens to them?" Malcolm turned to the screen where the Reed Holdings logo glowed above the ballroom. "Tell them this," he said. "No one loses their job for being kind. No one keeps it for looking down." He glanced toward the window where the reflection of the chandeliers shimmered like a constellation. "This building has stood for 80 years, he murmured. "It survived wars, recessions, greed. It'll survive change, too, because for once it's in the hands of someone who remembers what it's like to be locked outside." And somewhere deep in the room, someone whispered almost in awe, "He's not rewriting the rules. He's rewriting the room." The room felt lighter, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered like electricity in the air. The old order had been dismantled quietly, surgically, without a single raised voice. But Malcolm Reed wasn't done. He walked to the center of the ballroom where a spotlight followed him by instinct more than instruction. The remaining guests, still seated in stunned silence, looked on as if watching history unspool itself. He placed his glass down on the podium and spoke not loud but with the calm authority of a man who'd stopped asking for permission a long time ago. "I know what some of you are thinking," he began, "that this was dramatic, that it could have been handled behind closed doors. But that's the problem, isn't it? Too many doors closed, too many truths locked inside them." He paused, scanning the faces before him, donors, executives, politicians, people who'd built entire identities around being in the room. "I've spent years funding events like this," Malcolm continued, "watching people toast to diversity while treating dignity like a marketing campaign. Tonight that ends, because respect isn't a theme, it's a policy." The words landed like a gavel. Cameras clicked again. Phones were raised. This time, no one tried to stop them. From the side of the stage, Ava Nguyen stepped forward and handed him a folder. Inside were the hotel's internal reports, the ones listing prior complaints Charlotte Pierce had buried employees she'd dismissed for not fitting the image. Malcolm opened it, letting the pages fall open under the lights. "These," he said, "are the real numbers behind your luxury. The human cost of appearances." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One man muttered, "This isn't the time or place." Malcolm looked directly at him. "It's exactly the time. And this is the place." He set the folder down, unflinching. "This hotel will no longer profit off silence. Every employee, regardless of color, accent, or uniform, will have a seat at the quarterly review table. No exceptions." A woman near the front, a reporter disguised as a guest, spoke up. "Mr. Reed, are you making this public?" Malcolm smiled faintly. "Ma'am, it's already public. You're filming it." The crowd laughed nervously, but there was no mockery left, only respect wrapped in disbelief. He continued, voice steady but weighted with history. "When I was 20, I was told I'd never belong in places like this, that my presence was a disruption. Tonight I didn't come to belong. I came to own the room that told me I couldn't stand in it." Silence again. But this time it wasn't discomfort. It was admiration. Ava's eyes glistened as she whispered, They'll talk about this night for years. Malcolm looked out over the guests, the lights, the reflection of power turning human again. Good, he said quietly. Maybe next time they'll talk to people like me instead of about us. He turned to the orchestra pit. Play something different, he said. Something honest. And as the music shifted from practiced elegance to raw jazz, the Reed Grand was reborn, not as a monument to status, but as a testimony to change. The music changed slow jazz, fading into something freer, unchained. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom, wrapping around the stunned silence like smoke curling through old chandeliers. For the first time all night, the room didn't feel rich, it felt real. Charlotte Pierce had returned quietly, lingering by the doorway. Makeup streaked her posture, no longer rehearsed. The camera lights caught her, and whispers followed like shadows. She wasn't the villain anymore. She was the lesson. Malcolm noticed her, but didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Power wasn't revenge. It was mastery over the urge for it. Mrs. Pierce, he said, his tone steady but not cruel, you can stay. I don't erase people. I erase behavior. Her eyes filled with a complicated mix of shame and relief. I didn't realize, she stammered. That's the sentence history always begins with, Malcolm replied, and the reason it keeps repeating. He motioned for Ava to bring over a chair. Sit, he said to Charlotte. Listen, don't defend. Charlotte hesitated, then obeyed the first honest act she'd made all evening. Malcolm faced the crowd again. This hotel has hosted hundreds of galas for power, for politics, for prestige, but tonight it hosted a mirror. Every face in this room has been reflected in it. Some of you saw arrogance, some saw guilt, some saw yourselves pretending not to see either. A low murmur rose. No one interrupted. This isn't the end of a party, he continued. It's the start of an audit, not of money, but of conscience. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the massive Art Deco mirror on the far wall. You see that reflection? That's what ownership should look like. Clarity, not control. Charlotte's husband, red-faced and rigid, stood abruptly. You think you're saving the world with speeches? Malcolm didn't blink. No, I'm saving this room from becoming another polite lie. The man glared, then stormed out, trailed by a few loyal guests who couldn't stomach humility. The doors closed behind them, but their absence made the air lighter. Ava spoke softly into her earpiece, then turned to Malcolm. Sir, press outlets are calling this the ballroom reckoning. Has a ring to it. Malcolm chuckled under his breath. Let them name it what they want. I didn't come for headlines. I came for closure. He looked at Charlotte again, smaller, now human. Tomorrow, I want you to meet with HR and rewrite the event staff policy from scratch. No token gestures. Real reform, if you're willing. She nodded, tears slipping down. I am. Malcolm's gaze softened. Then start by apologizing not to me, to every person you looked past tonight. Charlotte stood, turned to the staff lined at the back, and whispered the two hardest words in the English language. I'm sorry. No applause. No music. Just the sound of truth doing what it does best, breaking and rebuilding in the same breath. Malcolm exhaled, slow and certain. The Reed Grand, he said quietly, is open for business and for change. The crowd rose, not in shock this time, but in quiet solidarity. For once, the luxury felt earned. Morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of the Grand Eden, the Reed Grand, as if the sun itself had come to verify the change. The chandeliers no longer glittered with pretense. They shimmered with a quieter kind of truth. Staff walked the lobby with a different posture, cautious at first, then proud. Malcolm stood near the reception desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He wasn't giving orders. He was listening. Employees from bellhops to housekeeping gathered around, uncertain but hopeful. I'm not here to replace people, he said. I'm here to replace the way people are treated. The words weren't rehearsed. They were earned. Ava Nguyen stood beside him, tablet in hand, voice steady. Sir, we've updated the internal system. Every employee now has access to the same leadership feedback channel, anonymous if they choose. Good, Malcolm replied. Accountability shouldn't depend on rank. Across the lobby, Richard Caldwell approached Ty, straightened, humility intact. Mr. Reed, he said, some of the former board members are requesting a meeting. They say they'd like to make amends. Malcolm gave a faint smile. They can start by paying the staff bonuses they've withheld for 2 years. Then we'll talk. Richard nodded, a quiet respect, replacing the old tension. It's already being processed. Charlotte Pierce appeared, then hands clasped, a far cry from the commanding hostess she'd been just 12 hours earlier. Her voice was soft, honest. I spoke to the catering staff. I apologized. Malcolm studied her for a long moment. And what did they say? They said they'd come back, if the new owner really meant what he said. He nodded. Then show them he does. She exhaled, the weight of her own redemption settling across her shoulders. A group of journalists waited outside the lobby, glass lenses glinting like hungry eyes. One called out as the doors opened, "Mr. Reed, what's next for you after this historic night?" Malcolm paused, sunlight haloing his frame. "Next," he said, "I'll keep doing what I've always done, build rooms where people don't have to prove they belong." A murmur of approval rolled through the staff gathered behind him. Ava caught his eye and smiled, quiet pride shining through exhaustion. He looked around the lobby one last time. The same marble, the same chandeliers, but none of it felt the same. Respect had become the new currency here. A janitor passing by hesitated, then said softly, "Mr. Reed, thank you for standing up for us." Malcolm shook his head. "I didn't stand for you," he said. "I stood with you." The janitor nodded slowly, eyes bright. Outside, the first guests began arriving for brunch, unaware they were walking into a piece of living history. The sign above the door now gleamed in gold script, "The Reed Grand, where every guest is seen." As the doors opened and light flooded in, Malcolm whispered to himself, "Justice isn't loud, it's consistent." And somewhere deep in the heart of the city, the sound of change kept playing steady, inevitable, like a jazz rhythm that refused to die. Night returned to the city like a closing curtain, soft, deliberate, certain. The Reed Grand stood tall against the skyline, its lights no longer symbols of luxury but of proof. Inside, the ballroom was quiet again. The banners had been taken down, the tables cleared, the stage empty. But something invisible had stayed behind: dignity. Malcolm Reed walked alone through the room that had once been his battlefield. The faint smell of wine and perfume lingered, ghosts of arrogance and awakening intertwined. He stopped where he had first stood the night before, by the same table where Charlotte Pierce had mistaken him for a waiter. The floor still gleamed, but now it reflected only him. One man, one story, one shift in the air that could not be undone. Ava Nguyen entered quietly, holding a file of press clippings. "They're calling you a hero," she said with a tired smile. Malcolm shook his head. "Heroes save people. I just reminded them we never needed saving, just seeing." Ava nodded, understanding. "Still, you changed something." He looked out toward the grand doors where new guests were arriving. The staff greeted them differently now, warm, confident, equal. "I didn't change it," Malcolm said. "We did. Every person who stayed to witness it, everyone who chose conscience over comfort." Ava hesitated, then asked the question that had been circling her thoughts all day. "Why didn't you expose them sooner? You could have years ago." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Because timing is power. I wanted the story to end when no one could twist it into anger, only understanding." He started to walk toward the exit, but stopped beneath the chandelier. Its light fell on him like recognition. He turned back to Ava. "You know the funny thing about nights like this, what they start with humiliation, but they end with humanity." Ava's eyes softened. "And what happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he said, "we start building the kind of future where stories like this don't need to be told anymore." He reached for his coat, the weight of the past finally leaving his shoulders. As he passed the reception desk, Richard Caldwell straightened instinctively. Malcolm smiled. "Relax, Richard. It's just a hotel now. The kind it should have been all along." Richard nodded. "Yes, sir. But it's more than that. It's a message." Malcolm paused, considering. "Maybe. But messages fade. Integrity doesn't." Outside, the night was cool. City lights shimmered across the glass doors behind him. As he stepped into the street, a bellhop held the door open. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but respect. Malcolm nodded to him, then turned toward the skyline where the world waited for its next correction. He didn't need applause. He didn't need revenge. The silence that followed him was enough, because silence, when it comes after truth, isn't absence. It's peace. And as he disappeared into the glow of the city, one line lingered in the air, quiet but final. "I don't need to post the clip. I am the result of it."